Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Stein. Stein is a clinical psychologist and the founder and executive chair of Multi Health Systems, MHS, a leading assessment and behavior analytics company. He is a former chair and president of the Psychology Foundation of Canada and has led so many other prominent organizations that I can't list them all here. Very involved in the practice of psychology in Canada. And as we talk about in this conversation, really has taken it upon himself to expand the impact of psychology and psychological tools in the world at large by mainly using assessments to help companies, governments, athletes, even reality TV shows find the right people and level themselves up. In this conversation, we talk mostly about one of his books, Hardiness, Making Stress Work for You to Achieve Your Life Goals. Hardiness is a little bit different than what you might have heard with grit. We hit that right away and talk about the different terminology and what it means to be hardy, and then really unpack the 3 C's to hardiness. We end a little bit early, and I wind up asking him a couple questions just for fun about some of the other work that he has done around ADHD, psychopathy, and reality TV shows, which I couldn't help but ask about that, including a reality TV show that was led by a former president of the United States. With that, I will turn it over to the conversation and to Dr. Stein. Steve, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you on today and jump into, among other things, mainly the topic of hardiness, which you have literally written the book on. So welcome and excited to dive in.
Good. Great to be with you, O'Brien. Nice to meet you.
Let's talk a little bit as we get into hardiness here. Like, what is hardiness?
Okay, so hardiness is a concept that's been around for about 20 or 25 years. And it came from studying stress or people undergoing stress and why some people seem to flourish under stress and others seem to fall apart. And it basically boiled down to 3 key things, which I'll kind of refer to as 3 mindsets. One is the idea of challenge. When you have a negative event or stressful event, you look at it as a puzzle or a challenge or something to be solved. The second area is what we call control. In that, people who deal well with stressful situations, they can clearly see which things they can control, like their own reactions, for example, and which things they can't control, maybe the weather. And they don't waste their time trying to control things that they can't control. And the third area is what was called commitment. And commitment really means having some kind of purpose or some greater cause that one can believe in or see ahead of them that gets them through the situation. So those are the 3 C's of hardiness.
So we'll unpack those as we go. But before we start, like, it might just be semantics, but I don't think so. There are a lot of words out there for mental toughness, perseverance, hardiness, grit. Like, what in your mind are the differences between some of these words, and where does hardiness fit in?
Well, there are differences, and I won't take credit for naming it because it wasn't me. Like I said, it was done over 20 years ago at the University of Chicago and some researchers there. But the difference between some of the major ones people ask about, for example, resilience. How does hardiness deal with resilience? Well, we see resilience as sort of getting through a difficult time and coming back to where you were before it happened. Whereas hardiness we see as going above and beyond, actually sort of, some people talk about post-traumatic growth, where you actually gain after the experience, become stronger after the experience. And the other concept people confuse it with is grit. And grit has become very popular, although there's been some questions about it in the research literature. Grit is really having a stamina, pushing forward no matter what. I'm going to get there. I'm a musician. I play saxophone. So I want to be John Coltrane. I'm going to practice every day of my life to get there. But the reality is I'm never going to be John Coltrane, no matter how much I practice. So the difference between grit and hardiness is that in hardiness, at some point, I'm going to realize that and maybe, shift gears, and maybe I'll teach music or I'll write music or I'll play in a studio as a studio musician. It's kind of being able to shift that whole challenge component where we realize that this isn't going to work and we can go in a different direction. And some of the research that really kind of speaks to this, there's been some studies recently on grit. One found that the higher grit mountain climbers tend to be the ones that die when they don't make it to the top. They won't come back down for help, right? Or they've done studies in gambling studies. So if you happen to be really high grit, you're going to be at that roulette table and you're going to just keep going and going and going till you win, but you may lose everything in the process. So that kind of differentiates where we see grit and hardiness.
Interesting. So taking your saxophone example, grit is what keeps you playing the saxophone and working towards that goal. Resilience is you coming back to the saxophone after maybe an injury or a life event where you're not able to play. And hardiness is what allows you to thrive to become the best saxophone player that you can be.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Pretty much the best that I can be, and also get a lot of enjoyment out of it. You know, one of the reasons I gave up playing after I played in the university marching band and all that, but I realized at that point that, you know, I was never going to be Stan Getz. I heard some piece of music that I loved and I knew I could never reach that. And I put away my instrument for about 25 years. And then by fluke, I picked it up 25 years later and started playing. And I came to realize that it's not about being Stan Getz or Coltrane or something. It's about what I enjoy, right? It's playing for myself. So now I'm in a rock band and I have fun and have a blast. And I don't care if I'm good or not, you know, good enough for people to come pay to see us. But you know what I mean? I do it for me and my buddies and we have a great time.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So let's go back to stress, because stress was one of the first words that came out of your mouth. There's a lot of thoughts around stress. A lot of people talk about stress. Is there such a thing as good stress and bad stress? How should we think about stress?
Yeah, well, the way to think about stress is, you know, where does it really come from or what really is it? So stress is usually your response to a threat, right? So what happens is we have a heightened arousal. You know, our nervous system goes up, our eyes dilate, our thoughts are racing. You know, it could be a flight or fight kind of response. Do I get out of here? Do I stay? So that's kind of the original concept of stress. But what's happened is, and you asked about good stress, bad stress. So it's obviously if there's a lion coming at me and those things hit me, I hit stress. I run as fast as I can to get the heck out of there so I don't get eaten. So that's kind of good stress, right? It tells me what to do. It's a signal where I should go. But where it becomes a problem, it serves you. And where it becomes a problem is where I maintain that stress for the next 5 years. The lion's gone, but I'm still sweating about lions coming after me everywhere I go. So that kind of differentiates. And it's sort of staying in that heightened state of arousal, even when there's no kind of objective reason, or sometimes there may be an objective reason to do that. But you're always worrying. You have what we call work of worrying, heightened arousal, all those kinds of things. So the bad one is bad mentally and physiologically. The good one keeps you out of trouble.
Interesting. So one of the things that kind of hit me as you were saying that is the word trauma. The lion comes, right? And your stress response has you flee into safety. But then in your example, 5 years later, you're still looking around every corner for lions. Where's the line between where stress becomes trauma? Like, do you have any insight into that and how people interpret the things that happen to them between those two concepts?
Yeah. So trauma is when it really overwhelms you and you don't really recover from it, at least in the short term. So it's kind of you're overwhelmed by the event. You could have been subject to a hurricane or been robbed or whatever. Some really, really tough event happens and that stays with you. It's really hard to shake that off. That can be really difficult. In our book, we talk about what we look for what would be kind of the worst trauma you could imagine. And what we thought was being a prisoner of war. There's not much worse than that, right? Because you can be tortured. You could be, I don't want to go into all the stuff that happens to these people. Yeah. That's awful.
Not a pleasant experience.
Not a pleasant. Yeah. So one of the areas we looked at, and my co-author, Paul Bartone, is a retired colonel, U.S. military, West Point. So, I mean, he's the real inspiration for this book. And, you know, by looking at people who suffered those kinds of traumas, we found studies showing out which people kind of come out of it okay eventually, and some people that never recover. And these three areas of the three C's that I just told you about on hardiness seem to really differentiate those that came out versus those that didn't.
So what about how we process that stress? Because so what you just said, somebody who's been in a prisoner of war camp for years, right? That's chronic stress and trauma that they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And they can still come out and thrive on the other end. But there's also the physiological impacts of chronic stress and having cortisol in your system for that amount of time. How much, I guess what I'm struggling to ask, but it's like, how much does your mindset help your physiology as you're going through these things versus how much is the stress? Like if you're under stress all the time, it doesn't matter how good your mindset is, you're still going to see adverse effects.
Well, the mindset's a big part of it, right? Because that's what interprets the stress, right? You wouldn't know it was stress unless you saw it, you processed it, and then it sort of flows through your body. So there's always going to be that mindset component that either that mediates the stress in one way or another, that makes it worse or makes it better, depending on how I interpret what I see going on out there.
So, okay, that makes more sense. So stress is the word that we attribute to something that we deem stressful. Mm-hmm. And so if we have heightened commitment, sense of challenge, and control, we don't even view as many things in the world that come at us as stressful.
Well, we don't view it as negatively stressful. So when we deal with athletes, there's a lot of stress before a major competition, but they just channel it and interpret it in a different way. So instead of having negative energy, they turn it into positive energy.
And what is the difference between positive energy and negative energy?
Positive energy helps you to go forward, right? When we talked about the lion, it gets you to run in the correct direction, or to climb a tree, or to think, to know what the lion isn't going to get, how it's not going to get you. And on the negative side, it's kind of freezing, being the deer in the headlights and getting eaten for dinner. So some people, and athletes train, a lot of athletes we've seen or worked with, will really train because they're going to be in high stress all the time, in terms of competitions. So they have a mindset that they've developed, and they know how to get into that mindset, and they rehearse for that mindset. And they see tournaments as challenge, excitement. I want to get in there. I want to play that tennis match. I want to take on that opponent, as opposed to, oh crap, I don't know if I could beat that person. They're really good. They've won a lot of tournaments, right?
Yeah.
All how you interpret it.
Again, I want to get into these three, but one other thing I thought was really interesting in your book was talking about stress avoidance, because I think it'd be natural to think, well, if stress is bad, I just want to avoid stress. And so I don't need to go out and, face a bunch of lions. I don't need to go out and play a bunch of high stress games. I could just sit back. I can avoid stress. But in the book, you argue pretty strongly that stress avoidance actually is counterproductive. Can you talk a little bit about why trying to avoid stress is actually a bad thing?
Yeah, and I would say most of the time, because there are a few exceptions in that, but most of the time, because it's going to sit inside you, right? And you're going to be deceiving yourself. So you may say, "Oh, I'm not afraid of this," or "This isn't bothering me. I don't mind being overworked. I mean, I can work whatever." And it's building up. It's like the frog in the boiling water kind of thing. So it will eventually catch up with you and may cause, physical issues. You may get skin problems. You may get ulcers. There's all kinds of physical effects of not managing or dealing with this or trying to avoid it. The time you might want to use avoidance if you're in the dentist's office and he's going to drill one of your teeth. I mean, you don't want to be more enjoying or confrontational on that one. You want to maybe try and avoid the pain in those kinds of situations.
Okay. So let's jump in. Which of the first three would you like to unpack first? Commitment, challenge, or control?
We can start.
Where do people generally start?
I start with commitment often.
Okay. And why there?
Because commitment is kind of it's a good starting point, because what it says is, we get people to sort of look at their lives and try and evaluate what's important to me. Like, what really matters to me? What do I want out of life? Mm-hmm. Do I want to live life that everyone says, I'm an honest person, that I have integrity? Or do I want to live my life where I'm really social and friendly and everybody loves me? Or do I want to make a lot of money and be a billionaire? Like, commitment gets us to set a goal for ourselves. And what we like to do is have people, think, where do they want to be in 10 years? Where do they want to be in 5 years? Where do they want to be by next year? And then break it down so that you have achievable pieces to accomplish over that period of time. So that seems to be one important thing to establish first.
And what does that look like? Is it just journaling, answering those types of questions for yourselves? Is that what you do with clients?
Yeah, sometimes we do that. We sort of write it down and we have them sort of write out what's a perfect life for you and look like in 10 years? Like, what would you like to be? Oh, I'd like to be on a yacht in the ocean, blah, 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 blah. And they sort of write out all these things and we give them specific categories. Like, where would you like to be in terms of work? Where would you like to be in terms of friendship? What about your family? Where would you like to see your kids? Where would you like to see your partner? Very specific things to think about and try and place them. And then we bring that down to the 5-year plan and say, well, where would you like to be work-wise in 5? You want to be the same job? You want to be moving to something else? You want to be training in a different area? So they break it down. And for some people, we go into week by week. We go, what did I do this week to meet my goals? So we have some direction. And ideally, if you're doing it well, like I like to try to do, like to sort of live through what you prescribe, I'd like to have every day to say that, I've accomplished something today. I don't feel good at the end of the day if I look back at my day, I didn't write something towards a book, or I didn't speak to someone, a client or someone who felt better, or I didn't do X, Y, or something. So I'd like to ensure that every day I've at least accomplished something that makes me feel good about myself or the day or my partner or somebody.
If you're willing to share, like, what are your commitments? What are your goals? How have you done this exercise for yourself?
So one of the things, especially when I started my company, we're an overnight success. I started my company 40 years ago. So my goal which was started as an assessment, psychological assessment company, my goal was really to take psychology and use it for good in the world, right? I'd spend time working in a children's treatment center. I spent time teaching at a university. I was a professor for a while. And I thought those are good. Those are great. But, in a university, you're talking to the converted. You're talking to students who are interested in psychology. Children's Mental Health Center, I'm helping a limited number of kids and families. I wanted to do something bigger than that. And I thought psychology had a lot to offer. So my mission, as I saw it, was to really take some of the things that I learned in psychology and apply it on a grander scale, which is what I believe we've accomplished. I mean, my wife and I were, two of us started a company in our basement, right? And we now have over 200 employees. And it's all based on using psychology to help the world somehow. We started with clinical. So we have the world's most widely used tests for attention deficit disorder. And we have children's depression and anxiety. So we built a whole clinical division. Then I had colleagues that I work with in the public safety area. So we developed the area of psychopathy. What's a psychopath? We developed the area of risk assessment for offenders coming out of jail. So it's a huge area that we
wow.
And then we moved into the corporate area. So we pioneered the area of emotional intelligence over 20 years ago, the first test that measured emotional intelligence. And we believe that work has spread throughout the world in what we're doing. And we're now doing it in terms of identifying gifted kids, regardless of their social, economic, or racial background. We have a new technology to pick up on kids who are gifted. So my goal has really been, what can we do with psychological science and how can we benefit the world? And I think we've affected the lives of many millions of people by doing that.
Yeah, that's incredible. And some very cool and interesting work if you're into how human beings work, which obviously I am, having a podcast called People Business. All right. So let me challenge that a little bit and in a good way. From what I mean is, I love that. That sounds so motivational and so meaningful. And yet I think a lot of people struggle to find that one higher calling for themselves. So, my wife and I are great examples. My wife is a professional ballet dancer. And from the time she was 6 or 7, knew that's what she wanted to do with her life. And I mean, she even said I'm going to be a professional dancer. I think it was like at 7 or 8. I, on the other hand, am more of a jack of all trades. I want to experience the world and achieve in all these different domains. And so we're kind of this odd couple together where one is so individually focused and the other is so broad. What do you say to the people out there who struggle to find a singular purpose like that? Is that the goal? Do we just need to keep looking, or is there a different way that we can be thinking about building commitment for ourselves?
Yeah, I looked at a different way of thinking about it. Like, obviously, you said you've done a string of different things. So I would try and look for the common path in what you've been doing. Now, you sort of mentioned to me you like people, and that's part of what you're doing on the podcast. So I would see if that's a common path in these different ways that you've worked. I'm assuming that you didn't spend a lot of time working as a mechanic, fixing toilets or building houses or that kind of stuff. I guess.
I have not. My first few summers were spent in the shop of a car dealership, but that's about it. I have not done that work.
Well, student jobs don't always count as ideal dreams, but so from what you've been doing, I try and connect the dots from all the kinds of things that you have been doing. And the benefit of that is helping you in the future, because if you're thinking of a new direction or where you want to go, at least you have sort of a common thread. And let's say it is meeting people or working with people or learning from people. How could you apply that in different ways? How can you move from podcast to something else? We are also doing, podcasting is new, right? How many years is podcast? 18 years or 20 years, whatever. But you found you found somehow that this fit your interests, and you seem to be enjoying it and doing well at it. And those are the threads I would look for. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting too. So the advice I hear you saying underneath that is be patient as well, because it's not like you just come out of the womb knowing what you're meant to do. A lot of it comes from exploration and finding the different things that you like to do and then connecting those dots, which inevitably takes time, right?
For most people, but it sounds like your wife had a pretty good idea, coming out of the box. She wanted ballet, and, one of my daughters is like that. She liked acting, right? And she's been into improv, and that was kind of her path, but she also liked helping people. So she tried to combine improv and helping people. So some people early on have more of a sort of a knack for what they want to do, and they gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
And other people kind of float around for a while until hopefully sometime in their life they discover what works for them.
Yeah. I think a thing that is missing a lot of times is the sense of exploration. I was listening to somebody talk about the real benefit of college being an opportunity to explore greatly. You have a bunch of autonomy now. You're out from under your parents. It's the first time you really have kind of full autonomy or close to it. And you have this catalog of opportunities in front of you in all of the different classes and clubs and experiences. And yet a lot of young people go to college and think, well, I need to specialize and I need to focus on my major or what I'm going to do with the rest of my life rather than exploring. And I think that translates later in life too, where they then get into their job or their career and it's like, all I do is work and then maybe socialize with friends. And I just do those two things, try to find a partner, build a family. But there's not that much exploration of the different things that they like to do. And if the advice that I hear you giving to somebody like me who has struggled to find their one thing, it's going to take a lot of exploration because you're going to need a lot of dots to be able to connect and make sense of. How do you react to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I sort of differ with you in terms of where people are coming at young people today, because what we're finding, the young people that we hire is that, and the term I use is curiosity. They come to us with curiosity. They want to learn. When they apply for jobs now, they're saying, well, what am I going to get there? What are you going to teach me? What am I going to get out of this job? Where do I go? And they believe if they find that they're not growing or learning from their work, they also want a different lifestyle. They also won't work the old lawyer lifestyle, days and nights and weekends and so on. But I'm finding young people today are really demanding that opportunity to learn, develop, skill. And even some of us, a bit older people, talk about upskilling, right? We want to improve our skills and learn new skills. Computers come out, the new aspects or ways of using them. We got to stay on top of that.
One of the things that you talked about in the book under commitment was the concept of hate. and hardiness, and how hate actually reduces hardiness. And, hate can create a lot of commitment. It can produce a lot of hot energy. Maybe it doesn't last that long, but it can produce some good energy, some good force. But why is that not a good fuel when it comes to hardiness?
Yeah. So interesting. You picked on that one. We've just finished doing a bunch of research on hate.
Oh, all right.
Well, this time. And what
Please tell me.
Yeah, we're looking at the underlying constructs. Well, I can answer your question. Well, I'll answer your question after I kind of tell you what we've been doing.
Sure.
So, in a lot of psychology theories, like if you study depression or anxiety, a lot of the work has been not just focusing on the symptoms. We know the symptoms of depression are you feel sad, you can't sleep, and so on. But the idea was and this is a psychiatrist named Aaron Beck who discovered cognitive therapy of depression. What lies behind the depression? So, for example, it's feelings of hopelessness, feelings of low self-esteem. So he had sort of a triad of cognitions or thoughts or mindsets that people have who are experiencing depression. So we wanted to look at how that relates to something like hate. And we developed a scale. We tested thousands of people to try and find out. We tried to find people who hate. That's always a trick if you're doing just psychological research, looking for haters. You might be able to find them, but they may not want to fill out your test. But in any event, we forged ahead and we came up with like 6 factors that underlie hate. And I'll just go through them really quickly, but like one is mistrust. I don't trust those people, those bad people. Another one is we call in-group superiority. Well, we think we're better than them. They're lowlifes. Although that works in reverse a bit with some groups like anti-Semitism, it's superiority. Those people control the world. So we got to play with that one. Intolerance. You really can't tolerate those other people. Activism. I want to do something. I want to break their windows or do something about those people. Retribution. The feeling that they deserve to be hurt in some way or punished in some way. And finally, physical symptoms. Physically, it's bad for you to hate. And there's some recent research that just came out on that. Anger and hate have actual physiological consequences in terms of your arteries, your bloodstream, all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of how we've just conceptualized hate. That's a brand new thing. We're just publishing that now. So how does it fit with commitment or hardiness? Well, what happens is hardiness, as I mentioned, is sort of opening the mind, looking for new avenues. You have a roadblock. How do I go over the fence? But hate constricts it. You're not very curious when you're hateful. When you're intolerant, I don't care about you. I don't care why you act the way you do, right? I just shut you down. I hate you. So hate constricts your mind and your thinking, whereas hardiness helps open your mind. It helps curiosity, helps understanding the world, understanding other people, being empathic. So tell me more about why you believe these things that you believe, as opposed to, you believe these awful things, I hate you, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's just so interesting. The more you hate, the less hardy you are. It's a good, another good.
Pretty much. I mean, again, we haven't tested that empirical. Yeah, we haven't done the empirical work on that yet. That's probably a future study that we're going to do, but that's where I see it playing out.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right. So let's say we've done the journaling work. We understand what our goals are, where we want to be in the next month, year, 3 years. Which one do we focus on next? Control or challenge?
I'd go to challenge next. And I'd say, so what are the obstacles? You want to be, I don't know what, I want to be a saxophone player. What are the obstacles in terms of where I go in the future? So, there can be all kinds of things. I have a family, so I can't take a lot of courses, or, there can be a number of obstacles to this. My current job doesn't allow me to do that, or it's too expensive for me to do that. So we try and figure out what are the things that are really stopping me from reaching these goals, getting to where I want to be. And that would be our next step, to map that out. If I really want to get from A to Z or wherever, what are these steps and what do I have to do to accomplish it? And then how do I overcome some of those challenges? So, yeah.
Is it just about laying out the challenges to get where you want to go? Or is it a different mindset around challenge in general?
Well, yeah, that too. That's a big part of it. You're absolutely right. The fact that it is a challenge, that this is something I can overcome, because a lot of people give up right away, right? There's no sense in it. Oh, I'm never going to be a carpenter because I could never take the time to learn how to do it, or the union won't let me in, or whatever, right?
Yeah. Or even, I mean, even let's say I want to be a carpenter and I have a family and I can solve that problem and I can take the classes and I can learn and I can find ways to buy the tools. Like that's all great, but there's a bunch of other challenges in the rest of your life too. And I could see like, okay, well, I'm committed to this. And so I can get through these challenges and try to be creative, but then maybe these other ones in the rest of my life slow me down or derail me for some reason. You know, somebody dies or my kid gets sick or something else happens over here. Like it just seemed to me like what, at least what I was interpreting, this might just be the lens that I look at things through, but I was really taking it as a call to take on any challenge, not necessarily just the ones in my dedicated commitment zone. Like it was really rethinking how I think about all hard things that happen to me.
It's true. It is. I mean, I'm trying to give you a concrete example, but yeah, you're right. It's how do I approach life? I mean, bad stuff happens to everyone, right? And as we know, some people can approach it better than others. But it does lead into control, which you were alluding to. So when you had the one side and the other side, so then it's a matter of which of these things can I control? Okay, so I don't have the money. Let's say I can't control that. But maybe there's things I can do that I can control. Like I can put together a good report to take to my bank for a line of credit. Or I could talk to some people I know and see if they would help me out or if they can, whatever. There's a number of things you can control rather than just giving up and say, oh, no one's going to give me money. I'm giving up on this whole thing.
So are challenge and control more interrelated then?
Well, I think they're all interrelated at some level, but it's sort of easier to give the example here where you work on challenge. Okay, I'm not going to be set back by these obstacles. I'm going to have some rough times, but I just see them as part of my stepping stone to get there. So there's that mindset that you have that nothing's going to stop me from reaching my goal, no matter how difficult or bad it is. And in the book, you'll recall, we outlined the lives of some people that was really challenging. And some people who went on, we talk about people like Lady Gaga or Madonna, who had some really challenges in their lives, but they were able to sort of get past those to see a bigger picture. And they knew what they could control and they moved forward on that.
What do you see with the people that you've worked with? What do you see that changes their challenge perspective? How do you get somebody who struggles with challenges and tries to avoid challenge as much as possible to shift and actually embrace the difficulty of challenge?
Well, we start by looking at what the obstacles are. So, you've always wanted this thing. So tell me what's keeping you from getting this thing. And then we say, well, what if we didn't have this issue? Or what if we didn't have, we start looking at the what ifs to find out what's really stopping. Sometimes it's just your own mental view that, well, I'm afraid if I get there, it won't work or I'll fail at it or whatever. So we try and get to the bottom of what the real obstacle is. And then we deal so what if you fail, right? So what if you don't make it? What if you're not great at this? At least you would have tried it and got a sense of what it's like. It's the curiosity. We try and build the curiosity. Challenge has all those elements that we try and turn into a puzzle or a game and say, don't take it personally. Yeah, let's say you're going to fail, but you want to have a shot at solving that puzzle and learning from it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I struggle with this. I mean, I'm somebody who has regularly worked out 4+ days a week. It's a routine that I built for myself coming out of college. I knew I was going to want it later. And so I said, well, I need to make it routine now so that when life does get busy, I'm going to have to do this. And I've learned through a lot of repetition that I feel good after a challenging workout, right? It might be very, very difficult in the moment, but afterwards, I'm proud that I've done the thing. And I've reinforced that in other areas of my life. I've done a little bit of writing, not quite as prolific as yourself, but I've done a little bit of writing for fun. And sitting down to write can be excruciatingly mentally to struggle through what you're going to say. But to have something at the end and to have put that work in and have the product, like that is really rich and rewarding. And I find it can be hard to bestow that feeling on somebody else who hasn't had that feeling. And so I'm always just curious, where do we start in getting people to experience the wins of embracing challenge?
That's great. I mean, you're an embodiment of hardiness. I mean, it's great because you've gone through all of those, right? You're doing the challenge. You know what you can control. You're working out. You're regular. You're happy at the end of a work. I mean, you're doing all the elements that we're talking about. How do I get someone to do that? Well, usually you may get someone who's confused. They're not happy. They're not getting what they want out of life. So again, we go back to our starting point, which is commitment. What would make you happy? What would you like to? Oh, I'd be happy if I had something I cared about, or if I had a regular career, or if I had whatever. So we start with that, again, looking down the road, where would you like to be? What's your destination? Where would you like to end up? And we try and develop that roadmap to get them to where they want to be. But you have to do what you said, which is accomplish something each day towards it and not get discouraged.
Yeah.
I mean, your example is great. I wish I was still working out 4 times a week or whatever. I mean, I didn't stick to that one. And it would have been a great one. It's a really good way to feel good. It fights depression. It's got all kinds of benefits.
Well, you found the saxophone after 25 years. Maybe you can find that after however long it's been as well.
I got a bike. I'm riding my bike at least.
There you go. Well, it goes back to something I thought when you were talking about commitment earlier too, which is the why behind the commitment. And like, I like the 5 whys, just keep asking yourself, why is that important? Or why do I want that? And go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think it's one thing for us to say, oh, I want a lot of money, okay, but conceptually that's fine, but why? And is that really what you want? Or is what you want the freedom to be able to, live your life the way that you want to live it? Is it the freedom that you're after? And maybe you don't need all the money in the world. Maybe you just need a flexible job. Like, I think a lot of us aren't necessarily lying to ourselves, but we're definitely not as curious about ourselves and what's really driving us as we could be to get to what those inherent motivators are. And I think if you can go there, it just reinforces the commitment, or at least it would seem that way.
Absolutely, because that's a good example, because it's not the material goods that really motivate us or keep us going. It's usually something that's deeper. I mean, some people are motivated, for religious reasons, or some people who believe strongly in political things. That drives them. But having this bigger goal or objective in the world is really, those are the strongest drivers, and then working back from there.
Yeah. Well, and I think it allows you to think more creatively. A lot of what you've said is thinking creatively about the problem. If I want more money is the challenge that you're after, like, yes, you can think creatively about how to make money, but what are you going to use that money for? And often you can get really creative in fill in the blank, whatever that's going to be.
Absolutely. I mean, for better or worse, I've built this company, but my goal has never been to make money. As a psychologist, I'm not trained in business. It was like one of the last things my parents thought I would go towards. So it was pursuing a passion or something I loved, and sort of staying on the path and having people around me who were more financially wise than I was, but keeping us on that path. It just happened that I made a lot of money, but that wasn't my goal, right? But the benefit, as you say, is that I have free time. I can pursue whatever I want. Like, I wrote that book because I just love the topic, and Paul and I are good friends, and I thought it would be a great way to promote a lot of stuff that he's been working on for over 20 years. And I get to do all kinds of different projects now. I work a lot in reality TV because it's fun. I like doing it. So I have the freedom now to do what I want to do and what I like to do. And and to spread your mission further, right? Of having psychology impact how people live their lives. Absolutely. So, and let's shift to control a little bit. Does control mean I have to figure out a way to control everything in my life, or should we think about control differently? I think it's a bit different. I think control is more about, I assumed it was. It's more about, what are the elements that are within my control, and let me focus on those, and let's set aside those that are outside of my control. We have a tennis player, for example. We can't control the weather, so I'm not going to bitch about the weather all day. I can't control my opponent. My opponent's a real dynamo, but that's who I have to play, right? So I'm not going to spend my time worrying about that, although I may study what the strengths and weaknesses are of that opponent. But I can't control my game. And one of the things we use a lot in those situations is visualization. So we have them practice a lot in terms of how they see the game transforming or happening. And those are the things you can control. You can control your own reactions. You control the weather may be bad, but how do I serve in bad weather? Or how do I return the ball in bad weather? How do I hit we practice for all those scenarios in advance so that we can control as much of the situation as we can.
Yeah. Well, and to your point too, you even said you can study film, right? That's something in your control. You can prepare for the top opponent. You can always do preparation so that you're ready to meet the moment the best way that you can.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah. Your thoughts and actions really are the only thing you can control.
Mm-hmm. And and there's a lot you can do with that.
There is. And, there's also a lot that you can't, and you got to be willing to let that go.
Yeah. Cause that's wasting your time. I mean, again, as much as I scream at the sky, it's still going to rain.
Yeah. How have you yourself gotten more comfortable letting things go?
It's not easy.
Out of your control.
None of this is easy because, sometimes I wouldn't say hold grudges, but, not forget things, being slighted or whatever. I think it just takes some work. I think you've got to just keep saying to yourself, does this really matter? Do I really care what this person thinks of me? Like in the grand scheme of things, I sort of build it up in my life. I've got my family, my wife, my kids. Do I care what this person who is like this far removed from me may think of me? That's not the kind of situation I go through very much. I don't get much hate mail and stuff like that, but that's how I would basically approach it, where it's a matter of, what's really important to me, what really matters, and just try to convince myself that that's not important in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. So much of this is just about being purposeful with who you are, how you show up, and where you're trying to go. Like I've done 180 plus interviews like this for the podcast so far. And so much of success and happiness, it seems like, comes down to just being thoughtful, taking some time to think about who am I, how do I want to show up, and where am I trying to go, and how do I get there? And it seems like we can all be doing more of that work to get where we want to go.
Yeah, it's I guess what we refer to as agency is the fact that I can control a lot of things in my life, and no one's going to come and make me happy. I mean, people maybe can try and make you happy, but it's got to come from within. It really has to be something that you generate through your own means for yourself. And that enables you to try and help other people become happy as well, because it's a lot easier when you feel good about yourself and you're happy to make people in your family happier and, and so on and so forth. But it's really up to them and up to you to generate your own happiness.
Yeah. So that's a good segue into a question I wanted to ask you, which is a lot of people listening to this show are leaders and they have teams. And so it's one thing for them to build their own hardiness. Where do they go in helping lead others through this? How do you instill some of this stuff in other people?
Well, a lot of the ways that we do it in terms of individuals, we set goals. We talk about, what do we want to accomplish as a team or as a group? Where are we going? What does success mean for us? What are the challenges that we have to go through? What are some of the obstacles to getting to that success? What are the things we can start to do? And we can start to do today and we can do tomorrow. And what will we have to do a week from now? So it's really being planful and trying to know where you want to go. And also to have objectives. I mean, I love having daily objectives, even when I work with a team. I mean, my band is a team, right? Where we work together. We're a tight group. I mean, we pick people to be in the band that like each other, that work well together. And it's like a work team, like many work teams I've had. Some of them, the ones that work better are when you like each other, you know each other's skills, you complement each other, and you respect each other. You have common goals, right? We all have the same goal as musicians. This is how much, we're all kind of, I won't say all, but most of us are sort of older guys. And, this is how much we want to play. This is how much we want to practice. This is where we want to play. So we kind of agree on our goals and what we want to do. We know what we can control in terms of our own performances and how we can play together as a group. And that's like a work team, right? We all have complementary skills and we got to help each other along the way. You're better at this. I'm better at that. When the drummer's doing a great job, then we're on beat really well. And when the vocalist does what she's supposed to do, we're right behind her. We all know where we're going and we feel good and the audience claps and whatever. So it's a team.
Yeah. I like that individual hardiness and team hardiness. Same skill set, just you can do the same exercises with more people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that. So I feel like we're kind of coming to the end of hardiness, and I have a couple of just fun questions I want to ask you, but anything that we have not covered when it comes to hardiness?
I think we've covered a lot. I mean, we could spend all day talking about hardiness stuff, but
yeah. Well, I want to ask, when it comes to ADD or ADHD, you mentioned that you had built the most widely used assessment for that. What are some of the signs that somebody might want to take that assessment? And where can they find that assessment?
Okay, so the assessment, actually, the Conners rating scale is the assessment we developed, and it's usually available through a professional. It's not a self-assessment. So you'd go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist who's trained or works in the area of ADHD. What are the signs? Again, there's adult and there's child ADHD. If we're talking about adults, which is becoming much more popular, and unfortunately, there's a lot of TikTok about this stuff, which is putting, I would say, too many people on medications. But the things to look for: do you have trouble focusing or staying on task when you're doing things? Are you easily distracted? Sometimes sleep is a big role, where you're not getting enough sleep. Actually fits into problems with ADHD. Social relationships. Are you interrupting people a lot? Are people tend to avoid you? Are you they sort of dislike you? And again, this has to all be qualified in terms of specific context. But these are some of the kinds of symptoms we see. A lot of unfinished tasks, difficulty following instructions, a lot of fidgeting, moving around can be one of the symptoms as well. So there's a number of different symptoms.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Somebody very close to me got diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and it's interesting to see how so much of that clicked into place. I don't know if they took that assessment, but I'll have to ask and see. Psychopaths. Mm-hmm. That one caught my attention when you mentioned that. What was the most interesting thing that you learned about psychopaths?
Well, they may be among us. They're not all in jail. So let me just give the person who is the world expert in psychopaths is Dr. Robert Hare, who's now retired, and we work with Bob, and he's kind of the leading expert. He's written a few books on it, and one of them in this context would be Snakes in Suits, is what it's called. It's about the psychopath in the business world. So not all psychopaths are murderers or are in jail. What it really refers to are a couple key things. Psychopaths are people who really don't experience empathy, right? They're not going to feel for you. They don't care. Whatever happens to you is not going to bother them very much. And there are a series of other factors that sort of differentiate the psychopaths from the rest of us. If you think of con artists, a lot of con artists have psychopathic tendencies in terms of their ability. Some of them are good persuasively. They can con you into stuff, but they're not sincere. They only care about themselves in the end.
What's the difference between psychopath and sociopath?
It's really a different term. Sociopath is not the term that we really use. I mean, that implies someone's kind of socialized into being difficult or bully or whatever. But in terms of psychopathy, there's actually brain differences between psychopaths and the rest of us.
Oh, okay.
We actually found differences in the way they process information, especially the way they process like emotional information, things that you and I might look at and we'd go, wow, I can't look at that. They may revel in it. They think, wow, that's cool. So they have a whole different way of brain processing and a different way of behaving. Their emotional aspect is different. Their interpersonal way of behaving is different. So there's a number of key differences from them and the rest of us. And they're estimated to be between 1% and 2% of the population would be true psychopaths.
There was a great episode of Armchair Expert, which is a podcast that's done with Dax Shepard, who's an actor. And he interviews a woman. I can't remember her name, but she wrote a book called Sociopath, a Memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically about her experience as a sociopath. And she's married, has children, has learned to live like many of us live. But she just, like you said, does not experience the world emotionally the same way. And she did have some behaviors growing up that could have gotten her into trouble. Luckily, they didn't. But it was a fascinating conversation about what it's like to live with that condition. So when you said that, I was very curious.
Yeah, that's unusual, but that's good that she sort of recognizes it in herself, and she stayed out of jail, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. She talked about how she used to stalk people, though. Mm-hmm. Not in a mean, she was never there to hurt anybody, never wanted to do anything like that. But she's just, because she can't feel the emotions, she's fascinated by people and how they live and how they respond. And so I think when she was younger, I think she may have even broken into somebody's house just to kind of like observe them, mm-hmm. but didn't get caught. And so never, wasn't put on that track and wound up being able to sort of like get the help that she needed from it.
Yeah. Well,
yeah. All right. Last one. And I know I'm sure you get this one all the time, but you do help write the assessments for reality TV shows. What goes into creating an assessment for a reality TV show cast? Just what is that process like?
So the battery I use, and again, it depends on the show. I work on dozens and dozens of reality shows, everything from like Big Brother to Amazing Race Canada to cooking, baking shows, Great Canadian Baking shows, MasterChef, those kinds of shows. So it varies depending on the nature of the show. Some are more
how crazy they're looking for.
Well, we don't want them to be too crazy, because part of the reason they have me as a psychologist is there's liabilities in some of these things, right? So you don't want the network doesn't want to get sued by somebody for one reason or another. So a big part of my job is to screen out people who may be problematic, or who may not be safe for them to be on the show. They may be a borderline personality, or have some depressive issues, or be suicidal, or addiction issues, or whatever. So one thing is to sort of screen out people who this wouldn't be appropriate for. And then the second part is to get a fix on their personality. And I use some of the same tools we use in corporations here, but we look at them a bit differently. So like emotional intelligence is a big area for us. And so you may want someone with high emotional intelligence, or you may, for some shows, want someone with low emotional intelligence. You may want someone like impulse control is good. We're talking about ADHD. So in the workplace, you don't want someone who's too impulsive. You want someone who's kind of thoughtful and can make good decisions. On reality TV, we love people who are impulsive, who are people who blow up or get into fights or whatever. So we're looking for a sort of a different set of characteristics, but we often use the same tools. So I'll use Hardiness, because you have to last for 10 weeks or 15 weeks. And it's not easy to go through one of these shows. It may look like it when you watch it on TV, but there's a lot of dead time, a lot of waiting. There's stressful things that happen in between. So they have to be able to cope with all that and make it through to the end. So we look for those kinds of things.
Interesting. Yeah, that's so fascinating, because you just think, that you're looking for the crazy ones for the reality TV. But to your point, like a cooking show could last a long time and you need to be hardy to get through it. But maybe having low impulse control could be interesting. And yeah, that's fascinating what that mix of ratios could be, plus the liability side. So that's fascinating. How did you come to do that work originally?
Well, when we were pioneering emotional intelligence about 20 years ago or so, a colleague of mine in LA called me up and said he wanted to know more about the emotional intelligence and how it worked and what the factors were. And he told me he was at a party and he met this guy and he does TV stuff. His name is Mark something. And he wants to put these people on an island and vote one out every week and whatever. And I said, boy, that sounds crazy. Who's going to watch that? Right. And sure enough, it was Mark Burnett in Survivor. So I worked with my colleague and looked at emotional intelligence and all the contestants for Survivor. And he moved on to Apprentice and used a similar set of tools to try and sort of get a handle on everybody going into that. And then they started doing shows closer to my neck of the woods up in Canada. And as soon as they started some of our first reality shows, they found me And I've been getting calls ever since. So I've probably interviewed and tested thousands of applicants for reality shows.
All right. So the question running through maybe some people's minds when you just mentioned that you did assessments on The Apprentice is, and I won't ask you for the results, but did you or did you not assess former President Trump?
No, because he wasn't the contestant.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Okay.
He was the host. He was the showrunner. He was the star of the show. So we didn't know. No, I don't think my colleagues tested him.
I had to ask the question. I wasn't going to, this isn't a political show, was not going to step on that landmine, but had to at least ask if any assessments were run. Steve, this has been a really fun conversation, and I think has been helpful for me and hopefully will be helpful for others. As you've alluded to in the last few minutes here, this is what you do. You do these kinds of assessments, and you do them for companies too, and help companies figure out the right mix of personality traits for the talent that they want to bring in. Where can people find you, engage with any of this content, or engage with your business and talk about maybe doing some of this work?
Sure. Well, my website, stevenstein.com is my website, or my company is Multi Health Systems, so they can go to MHS.com.
MHS.com.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, would encourage people to look Steve up. Steve, thank you for coming on the show today, and just really appreciate all the insight and some of the fun stories at the end.
Well, it's been great talking with you, O'Brien. Great meeting you. Take care.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.